Sheep and goats have existed for thousands of years and have been very important in the lives of people going back to ancient times. Sheep and goats were important to our ancestors as well, and Israelites themselves, as well as other nations at large, were compared to sheep and goats. In Matthew chapter 25 gives us a parable about sheep and goats.
When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats, and he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left.
In his parable, we know that in this sense he's referring to separating righteous people from sinful people. But why did shepherds separate sheep from goats in the past and still do today? In other words, what else does this action of separating sheep from goats represent? These differences can also help us to understand what spiritual characteristics we are supposed to have. One important additional characteristic to look for as far as differences in sheep and goats regards their behavior. Sheep tend to follow, goats go their own way. While goats tend to follow a head goat within the goat herd, sheep follow a trusted shepherd whose voice they know well. But sheep generally do not listen to the voice of strangers. Let's see if a stranger's voice will get sheep to respond and move.
One more time.
Stranger number one only gets one sheep to look up, while the rest do not even notice him. Stranger number two also gets one sheep to look up. But stranger number three is completely ignored. Now, let's see how they respond to their shepherd, whose voice they know.
Look at them, look at them. Isn't that amazing?
They are coming.
Just as we are to do with spiritual sheep, these sheep all respond to the shepherd's voice and come to him when he calls, but they did not respond to any of the strangers' voices. Spiritually, this means that everything we need is provided for us in a spiritual diet of reading our scriptures, praying, keeping the laws, doing good works, and exercising faith. These ingredients are all we need in our daily diet with no need for supplements, such as outside additions like worldly distractions. Spiritual goats, on the other hand, have a limited diet of worldliness that does not supply all their needs. From this we see that there is a big difference in the way sheep and goats forage for food. We just mentioned the two ways they eat as well. Goats are natural browsers. Browsing in this sense means to feed on leaves, twigs, or other high-growing vegetation. Therefore, goats prefer to eat leaves, twigs, vines, and shrubs. In other words, goats like to eat the tops of plants. Sheep, however, are grazers. Grazing means to feed on growing grass. Therefore, sheep prefer to eat short, tender grasses and clover. They like to graze close to the soil surface. Since goats prefer to eat high with their heads held that way, and sheep prefer to eat low with their heads lowered, this represents pride and humility, two contrasting traits that are present in the spiritual comparison between sheep and goats. The spiritual meaning behind this is, goats like to explore, just like worldly people do. They are always interested in strange things. They can be lured by their senses, sight, taste, smell. Sheep, on the other hand, keep their eyes on the grass before them with their heads lowered. In other words, their eyes are always on the path in front of them. But more importantly, I hope that you will strive to be a sheep's flock by living up to the characteristics they point to.
And the sheep follow him, for they know his voice.